I'm Shelley Murphy, one of the communication faculty here, and I appreciate you guys being with us. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today, who is Ken Bell. Many of you may recognize his face from the television screen. He has been, what, 30 years at Channel
35.
35 years. What's 5 years amongst friends, right?
Yeah.
So he's been sports director at Channel 6, the ABC affiliate in Providence, which many of you probably watch, for 35 years. He also was at Channel 10 for a while, which is the NBC affiliate in that market, and worked in some other markets, as we all do when we first start television. But he has covered a lot of exciting games, as any New England sports fans can recognize what may have happened in the last 35 years. And so Ken's just going to share with us some insights. This is part of our twice a year. We have a communication symposium, and we bring in people who are working in different aspects of the field of communication. We tend to bring in a lot of journalists simply because you guys see them, read them, and it's nice to meet them as honest human beings and kind of get to know them as real people, but also pick their brains a little bit. So Ken's going to share some insights with us. He's going to talk for about an hour. Then we will open it up to Q&A. So if you have questions that come up in your mind, please keep them. And it's up to Ken how informal he wants to be, but definitely we will have time for Q&A at the end. All right, without any further ado, here's Ken Bell. Thank you.
It is strange to look at yourself on the screen and say, man, I had hair at one time. You know, it's, I was a lot younger there. I think this was early 80s. I just wanted to kind of thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here. I retired at the end of July and have looked back on my career as something that I treasure, but I also am kind of treasuring where I'm at now. So freedom to do some other things, like, you know, a new season in life. I call it my season of serving, which I'll mention in a moment. But I just wanted to go over a little bit of my background, how I got into the business, and how my career developed. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in the business in any way, or whatever you're going to do, go visit a station, go visit people that you're interested in, a communications department, and just for your own eyes, see what happens and ask questions and get a picture of what it's like on the job, because you cannot learn that in a textbook. And particularly in broadcasting, what I was learning in the early years of college when I was in radio, I said, man, the textbooks are really outdated. They're outdated by the time they get off the press. So I would just encourage you, go do an internship somewhere, get a feel for whatever it is that you're interested in. And we've all been where you are. We've all needed a job. We all wanted a job. So the people that you will be with are anxious to share their story because they want to see you get ahead. Because at one point, we were all at that point. Okay? So I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. And I was the shyest kid in the room. If the teacher asked a question, I would never raise my hand. I was very shy. And this continued all the way up until 8th grade. And then in 8th grade, they forced all the kids in 8th grade to take a speech course. I said, I'm going to die in front of all my friends. I cannot imagine getting up in front and speaking to people. And so I remember preparing the speech, and I remember it like yesterday. I stood up in front of everybody, and I had to look like a nervous wreck. My knees were knocking, my Adam's apple was going up and down, I was kind of gasping for breath. And I got through that 3-minute speech, and I sat down, and I was so relieved. And about a minute later, I thought, you dummy. All these years, you had been scared to death to stand up in front of people, and you discovered that it was not nearly as bad as you thought it was going to be. And number two, I discovered the very thing that I had that was going to serve me the rest of my life. I realized I had a gift for speaking. It never would have happened if they had not forced me to stand up in front of that class and speak. There are going to be things that you're going to be forced to do that you're not going to want to do. But you know what? It might unlock something inside of you that might serve you for the rest of your life. Don't panic. Don't fear. Do it. Maybe it's not for you. Maybe it is. For me, it was. So I started being in speech meets. I started being in the plays. Anything I could do to get up in front of class or in front of people, start to develop my skill for being able to speak. And I still was nervous, but then that nervousness kind of focused me and I realized that when I prepared well, the nervousness disappeared very quickly. When I was not prepared, I was in trouble. And that carried through my career too. If I was facing a situation where I had to ad-lib quickly, breaking story, something like that, oftentimes, you know, it wouldn't be as polished or as good as it was when I had a chance to think about it, write it, put it down on paper, and then read it off the teleprompter. So, you develop your skills as time goes on. Now, I always loved sports. My dad was a huge Broncos fan, and to tell you how huge he was, if the Broncos lost, he never would speak for the rest of the day. Yeah. Wouldn't say a word. So he was very passionate. Well, I went out for my junior high football team, got down in the three-point stance and fired out. I had a little back problem, a little pain back there. Fought through it. The next day, same thing happened. The coach said, wait a minute, you got to go to the doctor and get his approval before you can come back and play for us. Turns out, I had a curvature spine. The doctor said, you can't play sports. I thought, what? Here I am in 7th grade, wanting to play sports. My whole life was excited about, you know, getting through the class that day to get out on the field. And now what was I going to do? And so I was a water boy. I took care of the jerseys. I took the water to the team. And then went to high school, and I learned how to take ankles and work with injuries, and I was a trainer for the team. And we had the head trainer for the University of Colorado come down and help us on Friday nights when our football games were. And I struck up a friendship with him, was learning from him, and I ended up going to the University of Colorado on a training scholarship. So they helped pay for my books, my fees. Each year they added something different. And so that helped pay for my college. Again, a door closed, but another door opened, and I was able to take advantage of that. Now, I grew up, even though I was the shyest kid on the block, I grew up with a real interest in radio and TV. I thought, how could that voice get in my transistor radio? Anybody ever seen a transistor radio? Yeah. I grew up with those. I would lay in bed with an earpiece listening to a baseball game, you know, like on the West Coast, and I'd say, how did that voice from the West Coast get into my radio in Boulder, Colorado? And then in television, how did that picture get into that box? I was just fascinated with it. So my parents were worker bees. We didn't have a lot of money, and they saved all year so we could go camping for 2 years across, for 2 weeks, I should say, across the Northwest. And every little town we went to, I pleaded with them, I begged them to go to the local radio station or to go to the TV station. I would knock on the door and say, can I just watch? Can I just sit in as your disc jockey is playing records? Can I sit in the news studio and just watch them do the news? And this was a joy. I loved it. Well, I hung around the local radio station during my high school years. We had a half-hour high school program on Tuesday nights, but I extended that to be there all the time. So I was watching the disc jockeys. I went out with the sportscaster when it didn't interfere with our Friday night games, and I would keep stats for him. And I was hanging around for 3 years. I went to the University of Colorado my freshman year, and the sports director quit. They said, this kid Bell's been hanging around. Let's give him a shot. That changed my life. So I did radio through my college years, working in the training room, doing radio and doing classwork. So I was there for 5 years at the University of Colorado. The middle of my senior year, I heard of an opening in Denver for a weekend TV sportscaster. And I said, why not get the experience of auditioning? So I called the news director and said, could I just come down, sit on the set, see what the lights are like, do something on videotape for myself, just to see what it's like. He said, sure, you can do it. Well, 2 days later, he called up and said, if you shave off that silly mustache, we'll give you the job. And my whole life changed again. So that was 1973. I worked in Denver for 2 years doing weekend sports. I did KOA radio in the morning for about a year and a half. I was still working in Boulder for about a year of that, so maybe a year at KOA and then on the weekends. And I felt like, man, I really need to get on the air every night in order to start to get better. You had to wait for 5 days to be on television, and so I was a nervous wreck when I got on. And so I ended up going to a smaller market. All the markets are numbered by size. New York, number 1, Chicago, I'm sorry, Los Angeles, number 2, Chicago, number 3. Boston is the 6th largest market in the country. So it kind of gives you an idea. So I went from Denver, which at that time was like 28 or 29, to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, which was 55th. But it allowed me to get on the air Monday through Saturday. I worked 6 days a week. And I really started to get into a groove and started to perfect what I was doing. So I was there 13 months and got to go to the Rainbow Classic with the Iowa basketball team because the sports director wanted to be with his family during Christmas, so I got to do that. The problem is I had to come back to Iowa, which is pretty cold in the wintertime, very cold. After 13 months, a fellow I had worked with in Denver by the name of Vince Gibbons came to Channel 10 here in Providence, and he called up and said, Ken, they're looking for a sports guy to replace Tony C. Tony Camigliero used to do the sports along with Chris Clark. Tony went to San Francisco. ABC was grooming him for something bigger. And so I came out, I liked the job, and I took it, and for 2.5 years I was the backup at Channel 10. And Chris Clark and I, we did some PC and URI basketball games on television. I was the reporter that would go out and do all the stories and put them on for Chris. And so I did that for 2.5 years. And then Vince and his wife moved to Milwaukee. His wife started to produce a show called PM Magazine. You may recall that. Matter of fact, Matt Lauer, we'll talk about that in a minute, Matt Lauer was the co-host at Channel 10 along with Sheila Martinez. And so I was in Milwaukee doing the same thing. I was the male co-host, and then we had Donna Jordan, who was used to work at Channel 6. She was out there too. So I did that for 3 years, and that helped because that was not targeted at sports. So I had to expand my thinking on how do you interest people in something, narrowcasting is sportscasting. People are already interested in sports or have some kind of an interest in that. I was doing things on a totem pole maker. I was doing things on fishermen, all sorts of different stories, but this was good for me because it expanded my awareness. How do I attract people to sports when I get back into it? How do I broaden the scope a little bit? And make you interested. If you're not a hardcore football or basketball fan, how can I interest you in being a part of it? And so I worked there 3 years, and then John Sweeney, who was an anchor man at 10, jumped over to 6 as the new news director. He called me up and said, Ken, would you come back to Providence and work with us? And I said, John, no offense, but Channel 6 was a joke when I was at Channel 10. We used to turn it on for laughs. I don't know if did you see it in the old days?
Yes.
It was pretty bad. I remember one time they were throwing to some video, and they said that President Nixon was giving a tour of the White House, and the video shows tanks coming up over a hill firing on a city. This just happened all the time. And they also had this big thing hanging in the back of the set that looked like a big stalactite down. It was weird. He said, wait a minute, Ken. He said, we're moving from New Bedford into Providence. We've changed the whole background of the news. We've got a better set and so forth. And I actually had 2 opportunities. One was in Baltimore, so I flew there, but they ended up keeping the guy that they had. They re-signed me to a contract. And so I said, okay, I'm up for the challenge. I'll come back here. They wanted to keep me in Milwaukee, but they could only promise 2 years of PM Magazine, and they wanted to sign me to a 3-year contract. So I didn't really want to be at their mercy of doing that. Plus, I was missing sports. So I came back, and the adventure began in 1982. And so for the last 35 years, I have been in the golden era of sportscasting in New England because I covered the 3 Red Sox World Series. I was there in '03 when Aaron Boone hit the home run off Tim Wakefield. But then I was there the next year when they finally beat the Yankees, and all the players' wives are standing there on the mound saying, take our picture, take our picture. We can't believe that we won the pennant at Yankee Stadium. It was just, the jubilation was amazing. And so then the World Series after that, and then in 13, the last one that they won, I was there also for that. For all 3 of them, it was wonderful. So then the Patriots, I worked with a guy named Don Coyne, who was magic fingers with editing. The technology is unbelievable, the advancement in technology. We used to have a satellite truck that you had to get an uplink to a satellite and bring it back to your station. And so we would have a satellite truck outside the stadium. So I used Don to go to those, the 01, the 02, and the 04 Super Bowl games because he was fast. He would run out of the stadium, he would quickly edit the thing, send it up to the link, and get it back to the station in time that I couldn't. He was just magic fingers. And so he covered those early Super Bowls, and I covered the last 3. So I was there in Houston last year and in Glendale the year before. And everything changed because we went from a satellite to a backpack.
Absolutely.
There's a backpack, have you seen, you're familiar with this? It's a backpack that uses cell phone lines. So if you have 5 or 6 cell phone lines, you can send an HD signal back to your station using the cell phone instead of going up in space off a satellite feed. Now, you may notice that there's a little bit of a delay sometimes. It's like they throw to the person and he's standing there for a little while. It used to be the 1-second satellite delay. Sometimes now it could go 2 seconds or 3 because the producer is responsible for gauging the gap, timing the gap. During the commercial break beforehand, they say speak. And then they figure out what the delay is. The delay is the time that it goes from where you are through the cell phone lines and back to the station, and the delay varies on where you are and what you're doing. So sometimes, if the producer doesn't get it right, you're standing there for 3 or 4 seconds. It's like, oh, go ahead and talk, buddy. It's like you're on, but you don't know it. So what happens is you actually have to talk while the anchors are still talking. So you're wearing an earpiece, you're hearing the anchors talk, and then they say go. The anchor continues on, but you've started yours because you're covering up the delay, the gap. You see what I mean? So it's a little bit complicated. You're also listening to somebody in your ear while you're trying to talk too, so there's a little bit of a challenge in that. But that changed the last, from, let's see, 2011, I covered the Patriots in Indianapolis when, Manning threw that pass to Manningham, I think, down the sideline, and they ended up winning. But that's the first time we used the backpack. And we were one of only 2 backpacks out of all the media that were covering the Super Bowl.
Wow.
The next time we were in the Super Bowl down in Glendale, everybody had a backpack. Only the networks were using the uplinks. So technology has changed so much. Celtics. So I covered the Celtics' 2 world championships in the 80s. Larry Bird, who was my favorite player of all time, my favorite athlete, because when I first came to Providence in 1977, I went to the Civic Center, now the Dunk. They were playing, Celtics were playing an exhibition game. Larry Bird's diving on the floor for a ball. I'm thinking, who dives in an exhibition game? He just had one way to play.
Yeah.
It was all out. And so I've always admired him. It was a thrill to cover him in the locker room up with the Celtics. And I was actually on the floor after they had won, and the crowd rushes to the floor, and I'm being jostled around. Now the media can't be on the floor. Don't let anybody on the floor, after the games are over with for a championship. So it was a different time, and I was always glad to have that opportunity to do that. So in 08, when the Celtics last won, it was KG and Paul Pierce, Ray Allen. So I cover the game, I'm in the locker room afterwards, and they're spraying the champagne. And I'm thinking, this is really kind of a lifelong dream to be in the championship locker room. And I'm talking to players as they're celebrating, and it was exciting. It was great. Bruins, covered them. Providence College went to the Final Four in 1987. And so I was on the bandwagon there. They beat Georgetown and Louisville in the regional to get to New Orleans for the Final Four. And so I was there. That was one of the, I would call that a highlight of my career, that game. Nobody gave me any chance to beat Georgetown, and they did, and advanced to the Final Four. That was Billy Donovan, who is now the coach of the Thunder. I won a couple of championships at Florida. Rick Pitino was the coach. But all of this little bit of history where a local team made it to the Final Four. We celebrate when they make it to the Final Four. Who knows if they'll ever win something down there? But it was a joyride, one of the highlights of my career. There was an athlete who pushed himself backwards in his wheelchair with cerebral palsy. West Warwick, his name was Jason Pisano. One of the highlights of my career was watching him do marathons. So we did the downtown 5K, we broadcast the downtown 5K live for a number of years. And so I was doing the play-by-play of that, and right at the end of the broadcast, there was this wheelchair going backwards down the street. I said, what? This is amazing. So the next day I went to his house. He couldn't speak. You know, he kind of said a few words only his mom could really interpret. But he had this drive inside of him. He went to the University of Connecticut, graduated from school there. And he said, my goal is to do the Boston Marathon. So he started at like 2 in the morning, pushed himself backwards, got within 100 feet of the finish line, and they wouldn't let him finish. He was not an official entrant. Can you imagine that?
Oh, no.
So he campaigned, he fought the BAA and won, and they allowed him to race the next year. And we sent a photographer with him that followed him the whole 26.2 miles to the finish line, and it was an amazing story. He did 52 marathons. He did the New York Marathon and the Boston Marathon. These are the kinds of stories that float my boat. These are the kinds of stories that I love. It's people overcoming the odds and doing what nobody else thought they could do.
Ken,
Yes.
I never thought about Jason Pisano when sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but
No,
just,
please.
you may not know this and it might be interesting in this context. I used to work at Meeting Street in public relations and marketing, and Jason Pisano was one of our graduates, and he contacted us like 10 years after he graduated. He'd gone through college and everything, and he wanted to write for us, to write stories.
Yes.
He would hold a pen in his toe, because his hands were not very functional. He would hold a pen in his toe and write. And he was a journalist, and he would write articles. He was a published journalist. And then when technology got a little bit better, he would type with his toe, painstakingly type articles, and he's a published journalist. So just like that.
Thank you for mentioning that, because he was a journalist. Yeah, nothing can stop you when you have determination to make it happen. And when you go through the right door. Sometimes you get discouraged because the door doesn't open up right away, but when the door does open up and you take advantage of that, that's why I was at this local radio station, and when the sports director quit, there I was. I went down to Denver, I just threw caution to the wind, and I said I want the experience of auditioning, and suddenly, right time, right place, which a lot of this business is. And you can also see Vince Gibbons that I worked with in Denver became the anchor man here. John Sweeney jumped over to 6. It is a connected business. It's a small business because there are only, well, there are like 4 stations in Providence. All the cities in the country have about 200 and maybe 18 markets. So you know a lot of people, or you meet a lot of people. Hey, I know this guy over here and so forth. And so, oh yeah, I used to work with him and he's good, so maybe I ought to look at him for coming in to be a reporter or a sportscaster or a newscaster. So it's all about connections. So anyway, to continue the story just quickly, so after Iowa, I came to work in Providence, and then I went to Milwaukee, and then came back here in 1982. And then I got to the point, after 35 years at Channel 6, I was running out of gas. I still enjoyed the games. I enjoyed the people I was working with, but we're in a social media frenzy now, as you know. And so I'm an old guy and trying to keep up with social media. So here's my day. I go in about 2:30, and then I've already listened to talk radio. I've been on the net, on the internet to see what's going on. I'm aware of what's happening. I've done some reading in the newspapers, which don't happen anymore. People don't read the papers. So when I walk in, I'm prepared, but then you have some things that happen on the job that you're always collecting information. So I might go out. Providence College is holding a media availability at 1 o'clock. So I come in early, I take the camera. The last 7 years, I shot my own video. I should tell you that there's been downsizing on all the stations, and ours, Channel 6, has always been number 3 the whole time I've been there. So we've always had to work harder, outthink the other guys, outwork the other guys, but we don't have the same amount of staff. We don't have the same amount of equipment. I don't have the latest equipment. So we do the best we can with what we have. So when this new management came in, and I worked for 20 different news directors, and 12 different general managers over my 35 years, so we were changing direction a lot. So the last 7 years I was shooting my own video, which I actually enjoyed because I could get a camera when I needed it and go out and shoot games. And then I'd come back and edit the games, write the games, write the rest of the sportscast, take highlights off the television for Red Sox, Patriots, Celtics, whatever it is. And then I would give a copy of that to the director. And if you're familiar with the news setup, there's a director, there's a producer that times the show, there's somebody that runs the audio, and then there's a teleprompter operator, so there are all these other jobs. Everybody has to be on the same page. And one of the things I liked about television is that it is a team effort. If one person has an off day or a bad game, it kind of affects everybody. But when everybody's firing on all cylinders, it's good. You're enjoying it. Everybody working together for the same product. So I would go to, I would put on the 5 we have a 5:50 sportscast and a 6:20. After that, I'd run over to the Civic Center, over to the Dunk to shoot a Providence College game, or I would go out and shoot a number of high school games. I went to Durfee, basketball games here. I was over in New Bedford shooting some games there. We shot football, basketball, whatever the sport was, we shot it. Then I go back, I edit, I take the highlights of a Celtics game off the television recording, other events that are going on. Again, produce that, type it, give it to the director, do it at 11 o'clock, and then after the 11 o'clock news, I tape a morning sports, and that would air during our morning show, and then I would post all the video that we shot. So I would put it on our website, I'd put it on Facebook, I'd put it on Twitter. So I was leaving the station about 1 or 1:30 in the morning. So the days were long. I'm an older guy. It started to wear on me a little bit, and I felt like maybe, you know, the job is for younger ladies. I work with Nick Coit. Nick is a fireball. He's really a phenomenal photographer. He's always on his social media, so he knows what's going on. And it's more of a, I think now is the best time for you to be considering going into broadcasting. If you have that desire, because you're already good at social media. How many here have seen a newscast in the last week? Have you really? Well, I'm thankful for that. I spoke to a marketing class at Providence College, 25 people, and I said, how many had seen a newscast? One person had seen Good Morning America streaming. It was delayed on her computer. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, these people are going to be getting into the business and they're not watching the business? But so watch, that's how you learn. An internship or whatever, you watch and see what goes on, and that helps you learn what the story is about, what you can do. Okay, so anyway, that's a little bit of my background there. I'm a man of faith, so I've through the years, I've been very community oriented. Not only my own church, I'm a deacon there, so which is like serving. And I've been involved with the ALS, trying to fight ALS, and Special Olympics and others. I've really been devoted to trying to encourage these organizations which do such a fabulous job. So I think that there is a responsibility when you get a job that has any kind of position to it. If you have a platform that you can use to help the community, it's your obligation to help the community. I felt blessed to have that job for 35 years, and I felt like I tried to use that job to encourage other people. Not only the stories that I did and trying to be accurate and whatever I did on the sportscast, but off camera, when you're at the mall or you're sitting down and somebody, you know, at a restaurant and people come up and they sit right at your table and they start talking to you. Hey, that's part of the job. You know what? I'm thankful that I have an opportunity to show that I'm a real person, that they can talk to me. I always ask them what's important to them. So that's all part of it. It's not just the job, it's who you are off the job too, how that all relates to where you are. So anyway, that brings you up to date kind of on what my background is. I want to show you a tape that was done. They really did an over-the-top job when I left. They did a week of stories of some of those things in my career that were exciting or important to me. And this is kind of a summary. This video is kind of an overall look at some of the things that I did.
Tell us a little, well, that's queuing up. You want to tell us a little bit about the sports locker that you guys did and that franchise you created, how long that lasted?
We had, I had an idea of having a longer form sportscast on Sunday nights. So we were the first ones in New England to have a Sunday night show, and it was called the Sports Locker, and it aired from 11:20 to midnight. And so we had some Patriots online. We had Bob Ryan came down when he had written a book. And so we had different celebrities in to talk live. We took phone calls, and we just had a longer format. We always had a major feature in there that was on. So we had lockers inside the studio with jerseys draped over them and a couple of benches. And it was really an enjoyable time. We did that for maybe 6 years, but each time we changed the news director, the show got shorter and shorter and shorter, and finally they just stopped it altogether. So
it's a shame because it was one of the highest rated segments.
It was. I still get people. I was covering a game over at Somerset High School. Principal comes up and says, "Oh, I used to watch you when I was a kid, and I wrote to you one time and said I'd like to interview you, and you called me, and you spent a half an hour with me on the telephone." That's the kind of story I like to hear, because I took the time to help somebody, and when I run into people in the past where it all kind of comes back on you, it's like, okay, I think I did it the right way. Anyway, here's the tape.
Good evening, I'm Ken Bell.
When you think of Ken Bell, you think
kind, selfless, caring, sweet, humble.
Positivity. I think of his generosity.
Perennial optimism.
Classy.
Hardworking, dedicated, committed, loyal.
these are the qualities that have carried Ken through 48 years in the business, beginning back home in Colorado and bringing him to Rhode Island in 1977 when he made a stop at WJAR.
What was that?
That's your bionic bow tie.
My bionic bow tie.
Ken's reputation preceded him. When I first arrived back in 1980, I was told, listen, kid, you want to be successful, you want to try and emulate the guy who had been here a few years before. That guy was Ken Bell.
Ken went away to Milwaukee for a few years until landing back in Rhodey in 1982 and becoming sports director at Channel 6.
Being forced to watch tonight's Celts-Nets game was close to cruel and unusual punishment.
It's just extraordinary, and he's been that way from the very beginning.
From there, you and I have seen the journey. Ken Bell followed it all throughout the last 35 years. So what's made Ken's journey so special?
Winning teams come and winning teams go, but individual stories last, and that's a big thing about Ken. He likes those individual stories, we both do, that can touch people, and those are the ones that people remember.
Local sports. That's what Ken Bell's legacy has become.
Just taking the court is the important thing.
I thought it was the coolest thing if he did your highlights, and I played soccer in high school, so whenever he did a South Kingstown game, I'd turn on Channel 6 to see if he'd call my name or one of my teammates' names for one of our goals.
With 4 outstanding Rhode Island title games played today.
And no matter the circumstances, Ken Bell's sports coverage needed to be top-notch.
How about this? And there are some other things here at A La Carte in the Warwick Mall.
Ken set the example for other people to do your best with the best that you have every single day.
His presence was always positive.
Mamma mia, it's the new Pizzatola Center here. I mean, this place is unbelievable.
When he stepped on the set, the whole thing was brighter. The old saying, rising tide lifts all boats. Ken rising to the set lifts all anchors.
And that's tonight's Bell's bloopers.
Thank you. Okay.
Ken Bell's good nature never wavered, even in the later years when more was put on his shoulders.
You think about this guy, when he started, people were recording on tapes the size of notebooks, and now we record on discs the size of pennies, and it never fazed him whatsoever. He just adapted and went with it, and he's a survivor.
That survival has lasted 35 years.
It's PCBC and the ECAC.
Now, we say a bittersweet farewell to our good friend Ken Bell, but not before a few personal goodbyes and thank yous.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken, so much.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken Bell.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, Ken Bell. We love you, we'll miss you dearly, and good luck in retirement.
The only thing left to do is die after that, you know. They say those. That was, you kind of saw behind the scenes there, all the different teammates that you have. When you get to the end of your career, if you can have a lasting effect on those that you work with, people saying that, that you cared about them, I think that's a big thing. And so I wanted to, through my career, show people that I did care for them. And I think that all of us, when we care for others, we get the best out of other people. When we respect others, they respect us. That's part of the secret, I think. Why don't we just open it up to questions. If you'd like to ask any questions, anything you've wondered about television or wondered about the area, please raise your hand.
Please raise your hand. I want to give you the microphone so we can pick it up on audio.
And don't be bashful like I was when I was growing up. You know, this is how you find out information.
Actually, Ken, let me start if I could.
Sure.
You talked about the changes in technology over your 35 years. What about the changes in content? What I mean about that was, in the 70s and 80s, people would tune into Channel 6 to get the Red Sox highlights.
Right.
Celtics, Bruins, Patriots. Now there's so many ways to get those highlights. How did that change the way you covered sports as the years went by? Because people don't really need it. They really didn't need Channel 6 to catch the Bruins or the Celtics or the Red Sox highlights, the major sports. How did you change in terms of that kind of coverage?
In the 70s and early 80s, I had to put all the scores on television because people didn't have access to the internet. And you know, cable hadn't come in yet, and so people tuned in nightly to get the scores. So you're scrambling around. When I first started in the 70s, you got the scores on a ticker tape. Then you had to take them into the operator, the video operator, and then he would put them on the screen. And so as time went on, the scores left because you could get those other places. Then as you suggest, now you can get video in so many different places. So how do you get people to come to you to watch? You try to give them something they can't get anyplace else. You give them local sports. Everybody has the Red Sox. Everybody has the Celtics. Well, you might find a play or a way of looking at it that's a little bit different than the others do. But basically, you're offering the same highlights. But it's doing a feature on the kid from Durfee, you know, on Michael Heron or you know, the Herons who were so great at Durfee High School, or New Bedford's had some great athletes in Providence. You know, you've got all the PC and URI kids. So you do a player feature or you do some kind of a feature that's out of the ordinary. The Jason Pisano, a kid who has had a knee injury, who's coming back that nobody expected to be back. And those kinds of things draw you in because you're not going to see those any other place. The newspaper can do those stories, but we have the advantage of video. When you can see something, it has much more impact. Yes, ma'am.
But at the same time, Ken, and by the way, Odette and I think you had the perfect name for broadcasting, Ken Bell. I don't think you could have a better name. You can pronounce it, remember it. But at the same time, with technology changing, and you made the mention of younger legs, perhaps, you know, you think of this another place for you to put your energies for the next 40, 50 years of your life, which I agree with. But don't you think your expertise and your experience means so much? I mean, you probably get the human experience better than most, or you can kind of understand how to talk to someone in an interpersonal way so you don't offend them and yet you get content. That takes time. Like I've noticed some rough reporters out there,
yeah.
and I don't think they get it.
Well, when I first came to Channel 6, you needed 5 years experience to be considered for a job there.
Yeah.
Now we're hiring people out of college. And sometimes when they come in for a video job and they want to be a reporter, they'll give them an opportunity to do it. So it's really a great time for you to try to get into the business, yeah. Because they are taking people who don't have all that experience because the salaries are reflecting the times when stations are struggling, networks are struggling. I don't know if you remember, but networks used to have reporters in all the countries around the world. And now they have one guy that's handling Europe. You know, it's, the downsizing of the stations is reflected to cable. So many different stations available, niche broadcasting. You have, I'm sure you have your favorites that you watch. Well, they get some of the sponsorship, and that takes away from the network stations that there's less money to play with. And when you're number 3, like Channel 6, there's even less money there. So Channel 10 and 12 are very competitive for number 1, and they are able to charge maybe 3 times more for a commercial than Channel 6. So you see over the long run, that really affects who you can hire, how you can hire, and you oftentimes get a gem that you hire who hasn't got a lot of experience, and then they stay here for a few years, and then they go someplace else. They're able to build their resume and go somewhere else. But they're taking chances on people. If you have some talent, if you're able to do it, if you learn your skill, you walk in, you're able to shoot, you know, on the cameras, you're able to edit. If you have some of those skills, you're good on social media, they could take a chance on you. So we're seeing people with less experience on. That also affects the overall news product, though, because you may not be getting the best journalistic view of what that story is. So that's kind of the downside of some of it.
That's what I'm saying, and I know you're not cutting yourself short, but the way you come across, your fairness and your caring is something you can't manufacture. It takes time to get to that point, and a genuine curiosity in people. That's why I've always enjoyed watching you. And I do watch Channel 6, and I have watched it because it is that local feel, and you're asking the questions I would ask, you know, and it's not the generic. So I think that's just one of those variables you can't teach it. You got to learn it from experience.
Well, I think one of the things that I've always been fascinated about is what makes you passionate about what you do.
Yeah.
Why do you care so much about this sport you're playing? What is it about the sport that has just caught your passion that you're giving everything to it? And I think when you learn from somebody why they have passion for something, it kind of gives you a window into them, and also kind of ignites something inside yourself about the passions that you have for things. So I agree, and I'm kind of disappointed with where broadcasting is going now, because I'm listening to, you know, I listen to sports talk radio all the time, and I'm hearing arguments, and I'm hearing like off-color stuff, and it's just like, where are we going? What are we doing? It's like, you know, demeaning other people instead of building other people up. I'm from an old generation now, and I'm not taking well to Minahan in the morning on EEI or other things where just there's this conflict that goes on all the time. I just don't get it. But that's kind of where we're moving. And our society is moving to more conflict too, by the way. So we've got to be careful about that. Yeah.
What advice did your parents give you?
What advice did my parents give me? My dad was shyer than I was. He couldn't stand up in front of people. So in a kind of, I think what I learned from my parents the most was hard work. They were worker bees. Everything, you know, they had to work hard for the money that they got. And I grew up in an apartment house of 12 units. My parents were the managers, and we got our rent free. Otherwise, I don't know where we would have lived. And my dad took care of the place, and he was a plumber, painter, electrician. He could do the whole thing. I have none of those skills. But I admired who he was and what he did. And he was in the Navy. He loved the Navy in World War II, and I always admired that. He loved the country. And my mom is 86, still living, and she's a fireball. So my parents taught me the work ethic. Yes, ma'am.
Where did you go to study?
So I went to the University of Colorado, and I spent 5 years there while I was in the training room and also on the local radio. And we didn't have much of a television studio. I mean, you have much better equipment and so many great opportunities. I just kind of, it was an archaic thing. It was a different time where you're using videotape and big tapes and everything. But I got the picture of how everything had to relate together, how the director had to be right on the same page as all the, they were leading the way, but they had to have all of the other people line up to where everybody was doing their job and doing it effectively in order to have a good newscast. So that always excited me to see how the whole puzzle could be put together.
Was there anything, I guess, that was really difficult for you to do or handle?
I was a terrible student. It took me so much more to get that information in my head. I had to study harder. I had to spend more time with the books. It didn't come naturally to me. And I'll tell you, when I graduated from the University of Colorado, it was probably the greatest accomplishment of my life at that time, because I didn't know if I could do it. And by proving to myself I could do it, that really encouraged me to have the confidence to do other tough stuff down the line. What you're doing, don't give up. What you're doing when you graduate, when you make it through something, you're proving to yourself that you can do it. And when you can do that, you can handle anything. When you give up, you sell yourself short. Stick with it. Because I proved, even though I struggled with being a student, that I could get through it, that I could do it. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I have a question that kind of, I think, will adapt to this audience a little bit. First of all, how many of you guys are communication majors? Okay, so as you see, you have a lot of people who are majoring in others. One thing that BCC does is most of our majors require public speaking.
Yes.
And one of the things that I stress in my public speaking class is finding your voice. And finding your voice in a way that will be heard by the audience, adapting to the audience. So along that line, I also teach the journalism class where I talk about finding questions that will make you a little bit different, because as you said, everyone has Red Sox, everyone has the Celtics. What made them want to turn into Ken Bell's stories? So with it, the question I have to you is, how did you approach that? And just fair disclosure, my husband worked with Ken for my husband was there for almost 30 years, so I know Ken in a slightly different manner because of the different activities we do outside. But anyway, I know that you, as a sports director, would find your voice and go to management and be able to persuade them to do something, to take a risk, something a little different. You guys started remember Thanksgivings was high school football. And you really came up with this idea that was kind of new. Get those local kids up on television, not just the big athletes. And how did you, A, come up with that idea, and then present that as an idea in a way that you could get management to invest time and money into doing that?
I appreciate that. Bob, her husband, we went to one of the Super Bowls together and a number of playoff games. We were in Denver for a playoff game, AFC Championship game. So Bob and I are close friends.
I remember you and Gene Levanchi when there was still money that two people could go on a trip. Remember following the Paw Sox on the minor league like 3 years ago?
That's right. Exactly.
That was interesting. They followed them for a week, I think you guys went.
Yes.
And followed what it was like to be in the minor leagues on the bus, dealing with all the different little local markets. And there again, that was a risk for them to send you guys to do that. So I'm curious how you did that.
You may have seen Gene Levanchi up on the screen here.
Yes.
He worked at Channel 6 twice for a total of 5 years and was phenomenal. I knew as soon as we hired him from Fort Myers that he was in for something big. He does the morning on Fox 25. I don't know if you've seen him there, but he's phenomenal. He was on Channel 7. He was their sportscaster for a number of years, and then went to the morning so he could spend more time with his kids. We had the idea that, look, Thanksgiving, 6 o'clock, who's watching the news? We thought, why don't we give people the local flavor of doing a half hour of all the high school highlights and feature all the different kids and run longer highlights. And I took that to the management. They said, well, yeah, nobody watches the news on Thanksgiving at 6 anyway. So we were the first ones to have a half-hour show. Now the other two followed with that after that, but I was always kind of proud of that we had done that. Just like we were the first to have a sports locker on Sunday nights that was an expanded view of sports. You know, when you compare yourself with other people, I can't be Bob Lobel, or I can't be Lynchy, or I can't be Frank Carpano. Each one has their own professionalism, their own expertise. What I can do best is be the best Ken Bell. I see things in a little different way than they see them. Each person sees life in a little different way, So what is my vision of life? And how can I use that to separate myself from other people? So I look kind of at the heart of the athlete. Again, I talked about, asking questions about what's your passion, why do you do this? And I think that you have to capitalize on what you do that's distinct from the person next to you. And I look at other people, and they're more talented than I am. They can do things, they have better skills and stuff, but I have something that they don't have. I have my own view of the world. You have your own view of the world. That's what makes you unique. You are a unique person. And so how do you demonstrate that in the way that you use it? How do you talk to people? How do you write something? How do you put a tape together that is uniquely you? Don't copy other people. Find out what it is inside yourself that you have that nobody else has. You have a view of the world that nobody else has. And so you capitalize on that. Does that make sense? Yeah. Any other questions?
Questions, come on.
All right, let me ask you this. So where would the country be? We see how there's kind of, there's a pushback on media. And we see these stories that kind of get out of hand and what's going on. There's a lot of, President Trump calls it fake news. Who knows if it is or not. But where would we be as a country without the media? Who would be the watchdog if we didn't have the media? So when you spend all your time on Twitter and you don't watch the newscasts, does Twitter, do they hold the politicians and everybody in check? Or how does that happen in our country if we don't have the media, if we don't watch the media? Is there a place for television and radio, do you think? You see how it's diminished, right? And you see how sometimes it's not done very well. But I was thinking of this on the way in. If we don't have newscasts, where would we be as a country? Who would be holding anybody accountable? How would we know about Buddy Cianci and kickbacks? Or how would we know about Ed DePreet, who was doing illegal things as the governor of Rhode Island? Where would we get this information? The cabinet's changed how many times under Trump here because the pressure has been put on because it's not performing the way it's supposed to. So I think we have to be careful when we say, I just don't watch any newscasts or whatever. We need journalism. We need the state there to be able to hold people, accountable to what they were elected to do, right? What they're supposed to be doing, public officials.
You got a question?
In what you just said, you mentioned specifically TV and radio. Would you say that print journalism would have as big of an impact and is as necessary in the current day?
Absolutely, but how many of you have picked up a newspaper in the last month? Have you? Excellent, great. But, it's online too, so you can get the newspaper and that online. Absolutely. But let me tell you something. The Providence Journal used to have 150 reporters. Now they have 20. So, they're still doing some good work, and they will hold people accountable, and they do the investigative work. But you see the difference there? You got 150 reporters. They used to have a reporter in each one of the communities in Rhode Island. And they would have a West Bay section and an East Bay and so forth. And now it's just like they seldom cover town meetings unless there's something really unbelievable happening, big controversial subject or something. But yes, the newspaper is the written word. Let me ask you, what has more impact in you, for you? When you see something printed and see that the details are there about what's happened or whatever, or seeing it on television or radio, does it make any difference to you?
For me personally, and this is going to be a bit of a hot take against what you said, I am a big proponent of written things as opposed to TV.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more nuance to it. I
Absolutely.
think what you say would work in text can be a bit more controlled than what you can say on TV. I'm an English major, personally, so that's a bit of my personal experience with it, is that I think text-based journalism can have a bit more subtlety, kind of, you know? I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time kind of...
No, I understand exactly what you're saying, because now a television news report on something may last a minute 15, or a minute 20, minute 30, maybe at the max. In print, you write out the details of the story. You have more space to be able to present something. I wrote a monthly article for the East Greenwich magazine just on a local athlete, and I really enjoyed it because I had time and space to put something together. You're not on for a minute 15. I mean, what can you really do in a minute 15? You give the basics of the thing, and you get people who give you a little bit of emotion about something, or you just have to stick to the basics. So I agree with you. And to me, when I read something, it carries a lot of weight. That's why I like to read the newspaper. I can read through all the details of something. Where on television, I'm getting just things that will spark my interest to go to the written word someplace. So stick with the English. And you need the basics. You know, by getting the foundation for writing, you'll be good. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, can I piggyback on that question?
Sure.
One of the things I talk to my students about, and I want to ask you, because you've obviously been doing this for a long time, do you feel that now as a reporter that you're not given enough time to gain perspective? Because especially, I grew up watching you on Sports Talk, you had a week to sort of build perspective on stories and ideas, but now because of the speed that the news has to go out, that you're sort of robbed of the opportunity to really gain good perspective on something because you have to push it out so quickly.
That's a very good point, and I think that maybe one of the other issues that kind of relates to that is that you have younger reporters who don't have the knowledge of the infrastructure of things. So they don't have the history, they don't have the background. That's one of the things I enjoyed about the 35 years at Channel 6 is that I knew the history of things. I knew what was important in the 80s that now was relating to something that was happening now. I knew the history of teams, families who have generations of kids playing, these sports. And so that history really helps. When you come in from some other place, you don't know where Fall River is. And so it takes you some time to get up to speed. What I did when I first came to Providence in '77, I just drove around the streets. I just drove around downtown and all the cities. I just wanted to know where things were and what the DNA of Rhode Island was. And I realized that they love coffee. There's a Dunkin' Donuts on every corner. And they love ice cream and lemonade in the summer. And, but to really understand the area. And I think that one of our problems at Channel 6 is that I've had 20 different news directors, and some have come from the West Coast. They don't understand the political climate here. They don't understand how much politics means to this area, how people follow them, what the impact is of that, how you know your state senator who's the barber, in your downtown. They didn't take the time really to get out into the community to understand what the culture is really like. And I think that's really important. Wherever you work, whatever you do, understand the DNA of where you're working or what the place is all about. Because this will give you an insight into the questions you ask, how the place operates. A lot of places, the politicians, all right, they have some say. Everybody, the governor. You see the governor walking down the street at the East Greenwich Parade this year, the Veterans Day Parade, there's the governor there. So that you have access to all of these politicians, and that somehow makes you feel like you're a part of governing the place. And so you have to understand that, I think, when you, particularly if you're in a management job, because you have to marshal your resources toward that end. We went soft news for a long time. It was like kids and dogs. It's like animals and children's stories. And it's like, where's the beef? Where's the news? And so you have these 20 different news directors, each with their own philosophy coming in. We didn't stick with anything long enough. And so we've kind of been spinning our wheels in a lot of ways. Both 10 and 12 have investigative units. You know, we can't afford to have an investigative unit. We just don't have the manpower to do it. But they have teams set aside to do those investigative reports. Tim White over at 12, and Parker Gavigan, who used to work at Channel 6. So many used to work for us, but Parker is part of the investigative unit at 10. So they do a good job. And I'm thankful for those units because they hold people to the fire. Yes, ma'am.
So you kind of just touched on it a little bit, but how do you, especially in this age where we're looking for transparency, especially with our reporters in whatever field you're in, how do you kind of fight the good fight, stay honest, stay true, stay genuine, and not get caught up in like these blurred lines of the political climate that we're in?
Thank you for that question. It's, I think you have to be a person of character, and I'm not so sure that that's always the case. I think people are trying hard, but really, you have to be a person of character. You have to have an ethical approach to things. I think I grew up in an age when journalism meant something, where you were trying to play the middle of the road. Now in sports, I had a little liberty. You know, you can throw a few opinions around, but you try to present, you know, some kind of a controversial subject from the middle, both sides. And we're in an age now where you've got CNN for 24 hours. When Matt Lauer happens, what are you doing for 24 hours? Yeah. Matt Lauer. So it's hammering the thing, it's opinions, it's like, we've lost perspective on how to keep the main thing the main thing. And this is just the age we're in, sensationalism. Yep. You know, we had sensationalism in print back in the early 1900s, and now we're kind of on media, we're back to, am I right? Do you see that? Just where, and I think talk radio, people get on, they express anything they want. You know, they assassinate another person's character, or they're calling them names, or is that good for us? I don't think so, but. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
You're the next. Go ahead.
Looking back on your career, your 35-year career, what would you say would you do different or change?
You know, I probably wouldn't be as stressed out. Stress kind of led me to the end. I wasn't handling stress quite as much as I was before. I was always worried about missing a story or not being on top of something, and so that kind of affected my family a little bit. You know, hey, you know, if the seat can't be empty. So there were 2 of us in the sports department, so if the other guy was off, I was on. So oftentimes you're working 6, 7 days a week. That's tough on a family. You're always covering the Patriots, so you go up there at like 11 in the morning, and then you're doing the late news, and so you're going home at midnight or so. So the hours are long, which you're doing what you're passionate about, but it does wear on you after a while. So I wish I had a little better perspective about not being so overly stressed out, just enjoying the job a little bit more along the way. I was worried that with a 2-person sports department, what was I missing? What did we need to be on top of? So I think that was probably the thing right there. There's, you know, think about it. You're in there, you're editing, you got out to shoot something, you're editing, you're writing. Everything is like geared to hit the crescendo right at 5:50 or 6:20. That chair needs to be filled. So if something late happens, you're scrambling. Sometimes, you know, I'm out of breath because I'm just panicking a little bit to get the story together, to have the right details. Some things happen right before you go on, and so that always was a challenge. Does that make sense to you? Okay. Yes, sir.
My view of talk radio is that people are given the opportunity to be honest. Sometimes there's character assassination going on, but speaking of character assassination, I wanted to ask, why would somebody want to go into the field that you were in if a mere accusation of something automatically breeds them as the view of being guilty and they get fired, even though they don't even have an opportunity to be seen as innocent and to prove guilty? I don't understand.
We're in an age right now where people are jumping to conclusions, and when a business like NBC, which is all an image business, right? It's all about image. If your image is damaged, what do you have? You have no credibility. So that's why I think NBC jumped on this, and we're kind of in this tidal wave now Weinstein and all of these guys along the way. And so we're just in a cycle right now in our country where we are very sensitive to this. This shouldn't be happening. And so the mere presence of somebody making accusations or whatever affects your overall image to convey information to the public. All right, now here's one thing. So they show this video of Matt Lauer talking with O'Reilly about his fall. Well, do you see there's a little bit of there's a problem there? You have a guy who maybe has this going on and he's grilling the other guy, or Bill O'Reilly, over what he did. It's like disingenuous.
So he has an agenda.
He does. But what I'm saying is you have one guy who we didn't know all this maybe in the closet, talking to another guy and kind of putting him under the fire. The same questions that could be now turned to Matt. And so how do you respect a news organization when someone is got this going on and yet they're kind of targeting or ridiculing somebody else who has this in their background? So this is very damaging. Very damaging. And I think that's why NBC called him up the same night that this person walked into the president's office and said, "You're not coming to work tomorrow, that's it, you're fired." So we're, again, TV and radio is all about image. If your image is damaged, sponsors are out the door, you don't have the money to pay people, where are you going? You're going to drop in the ratings, it's all a ratings game, as you know. Has anybody here ever had a ratings black box on their television, or have you ever done ratings? Have you?
Yeah, I have right now. I have Nielsen.
You have right now. You have Nielsen?
Yep.
This is, yeah, November. November is a ratings month.
Yep. They just came to my house yesterday.
Did they?
Yep.
Could we hand her the microphone?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead and explain how that does. Does everybody know how the ratings thing works? You've got like 300 people in our area that are really deciding what are the top shows in our area. Please, how does it work?
So I just asked them yesterday because I was curious about it. I said, how do you pick it? And so they go to every neighborhood and they basically knock on a door and they ask, they have one house in mind. They ask them, if they say no, they go to the next door. We happen just to be the house that they picked, and we said yes. So they have a ratings box and all of our TVs that have internet access and a cable box. And that every few months or so they come in, they check the sound, and they pick up what we're watching through our sound. And so that kind of feeds into the ratings, what shows are doing well, what aren't, and it's kind of cool actually.
I appreciate that. Now, do they ask how many people were watching that show at the right time?
Yeah, so they ask us whose TV is which. They ask us some questions, like for me and my student, what am I interested in? They ask different questions for my parents. They even ask like if we have a family member that comes in and watches TV for maybe 2-3 times a week. So they kind of use psychology and then mix it with their data. And it's pretty interesting.
Interesting, yeah, great.
I know I had one time I was given a physical diary
for
radio ratings, and with the diary was a $1 bill.
Paid you $1. But again, you've got maybe 300 of these television, or 300 households in your area that they monitor, and then that tells you who's the #1 station, who's the #1 newscast, #2, #3. You look at 300 out of 1.5 million people in our area. If you're #3 like us, you're saying, boy, this is a bad system. If you're #1, you say, this is great, works out perfectly. And then across the country, you may have 1,200 households across all of America telling you what the top shows are, and companies are living and dying with the advertising on those shows.
One last question.
Oh yeah, okay.
I have a question. Do you think the media is fueling the fire for mass shootings with highlighting the shooter for like a week for copycats?
You know, I do worry about the copycat thing because we are seeing stories in Germany of like 2 people who are shot someplace, or all across the world. Anytime a little disturbance happens or something, you're now seeing it on television. And I think we're getting a picture of like, it's kind of like a fear thing. You know, it's like, wow, this is happening all over, where in the past, these would be incidents that would be maybe covered by that country. or that state, but wouldn't make national news. Now you're feeling, don't you get the feeling like, wow, this is happening like everywhere? Where this is probably maybe no more, although some of the horrible events are worse than they've ever been, I think. But some of the minor things, these have always been happening, but we just weren't aware of them. We didn't know about them. And I think that we can, as a media, particularly the 24-hour CNN news cycle, we're driving home things, and I think it does, if you're mentally unstable, I think it could encourage you to act out something that you shouldn't. That's my own feeling. Yeah, we've got, I think television walks a fine line. We can create fear. You know, we can create fear in America. That's why I'm saying we need responsible journalists. So, okay. I don't know where we go from here, but I think we'll always have a need for radio and TV, and it's also, let me just end with this. You carry a lot of weight. If you call or you write a letter to a station and call them into question on something, that will be read, it will be heard. And oftentimes that does have effect. Just 5 letters could change something at a station. So if you have a viewpoint of something, if there's something that you feel is wrong, call the station or write them. Tell them about it. Get your friends to write. This is how things change. Or talk to the sponsors of those programs. That also gets them where it hurts.
Okay, I just want to wrap up, and before we thank Ken, I just want to add some context to one thing. The Matt Lauer comment, just so you guys are aware, Ken, you can attest to this, that anyone who's on air has a contract, and one clause in that contract is that you won't do anything that will make the station look bad, that will hurt their image. So it's not quite the same as a court of law, to say the least. And the other thing, just for context, I really want part of what Ken is saying is being informed consumers. Vanity Fair was in there for 2 months doing an investigation before this one person got the strength to come up. So not to put a little plug in there, but I think part of what we're always saying in our classes is being informed consumers and know what's going on. So the contracts are really why he was fired, and then what comes out legally is a whole other issue. But anyway, I just had to add that context.
Yeah,
some of you guys who think you got
I had a moral clause contract. Also, if I did anything to embarrass the station, anything reflecting bad on the station, they could fire me without cause.
Right, which is simple as if you were caught being publicly drunk.
Right.
Something as simple as that. So anything that influences. So anyway, thank you guys for being such a wonderful audience, and help me thank Ken for giving us this time. And just one last thing I forgot to add, this is every semester we do one of these communication symposiums, and it is a co-sponsored by the Communication Transfer Program and Keith Tebow and his staff from FRC Community Media. And so it's all available online. We've had a number of speakers, so if you want to hear other people's opinions on what's going on in communication, please look for the links on that, and we will share it broadly. Thank you again, Ken.
Thank you.